clock on my nightstand glowed 11:47 p.m. when Monroe finally walked through our front door, her yoga mat slung over her shoulder like some kind of spiritual weapon. 3 days. 3 goddamn days of intensive meditation retreats that somehow required designer lingerie and expensive perfume. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. I'm Finley Varlin, 45 years old, and I've spent the last 20 years designing buildings that actually stay standing. Unlike my marriage, apparently. How was your enlightenment? I asked from the living room couch, not bothering to look up from my architectural plans. Monroe froze in the doorway, her perfectly manicured fingers tightening around her yoga mat. It was transformative, Finley. You wouldn't understand. Try me. I'm surprisingly good at understanding things when people explain them honestly. She walked past me toward the stairs, her heels clicking against the hardwood floor we'd installed together 5 years ago, back when we still did things together. I'm tired. We'll talk tomorrow. Actually, let's talk now. I stood up and pulled out my phone, opening the photo gallery. Because I think there might be some confusion about what yoga actually involves. The first photo showed Monroe wrapped around a man outside the Riverside Motel. The second showed them kissing against his BMW. The third showed them entering room 237 together. Monroe's face went white, then red, then white again. Where did you get these? Mason's been doing some freelance photography. Turns out he's really good at capturing authentic moments between people. You had me followed? Her voice cracked on the last word. I had my suspicions confirmed. There's a difference. I scrolled to another photo. Dr. Jory Trentel, right? Your dentist? I have to say, Monroe, when you said you needed more frequent cleanings, I thought you meant your teeth. She lunged for my phone, but I pulled it back. 20 years of marriage had taught me her moves. Finley, this isn't what it looks like. It looks like my wife of 20 years is screwing her dentist at a motel that charges by the hour. What exactly should it look like? Monroe's composure cracked completely. You don't understand. You're never here. You're always working. You don't pay attention to me anymore. So you decided to pay attention to Dr. Feelgood instead? Don't you dare judge me. She was screaming now, her face twisted with rage and desperation. You have no idea what it's like being married to someone who cares more about buildings than his own wife. I looked at her for a long moment. This woman I'd loved since we were both young and stupid and full of dreams about growing old together. Now she was just a stranger wearing my wife's face, making excuses for betraying everything we'd built. You're right, I said quietly. I don't understand. But I'm a quick learner. She stormed upstairs, slamming the bedroom door hard enough to shake the house. I waited until I heard the shower running, then picked up her purse from where she'd dropped it by the door. Inside, tucked behind her wallet, was a burner phone I'd never seen before. The recent messages made my stomach turn. 3 months of planning secret meetups, spending my money on gifts for him, laughing about how clueless I was. The last message was from yesterday. Can't wait to start our real life together. Just need to figure out how to dump the extra weight. Extra weight. 20 years of marriage, and I was extra weight. I took photos of everything with my phone, then put her purse back exactly where she'd left it. Tomorrow, Monroe was going to learn that extra weight can be surprisingly heavy when it falls on you. Mason's private investigator office looked exactly like you'd expect. Cluttered desk, coffee-stained papers, and a cynical ex-cop who'd seen too much of humanity's worst impulses. He was my oldest friend, dating back to high school, and the only person I trusted completely. So she called you extra weight? Mason leaned back in his chair, shaking his head. After 20 years? Extra weight that needs to be dumped so she can start her real life with Dr. Drill and Phil. I handed him printouts of the burner phone messages. I need to know everything, Mason. How long this has been going on, how much of our money she spent on him, what they're planning. Mason studied the messages, his weathered face grim. This is pretty damning stuff, Finn. You could take her to the cleaners in divorce court with this. Divorce court is just the beginning. I want her to understand what it feels like to have your whole life pulled out from under you. Careful, buddy. Revenge has a way of eating people alive. So does betrayal. At least revenge is something I can control. Mason sighed and pulled out a legal pad. All right, but we do this smart and legal. No crazy shit that lands you in jail. Over the next week, Mason and I built a comprehensive dossier on Monroe's affair. Bank records showed she'd spent over $15,000 in the past 3 months. Expensive dinners, hotel rooms, gifts for Jory, all charged to our joint credit card while I was working 60-hour weeks to pay for her self-discovery journey. The burner phone revealed the full scope of their relationship. They'd been planning to leave their respective spouses and start over in Portland. Monroe had already been looking at apartments and jobs, using my money to fund her escape plan. But the most damaging evidence was a recorded phone call Mason had captured using perfectly legal surveillance techniques. Monroe and Jory discussing how to maximize their divorce settlements, including Monroe's plan to claim I was emotionally abusive and had driven her to seek comfort elsewhere. The extra weight comment was just the warm-up, I told Mason as we reviewed the recordings. She's planning to destroy my reputation to cover her own tracks. So what's the plan? I looked at the evidence spread across Mason's desk. Photos, bank records, phone transcripts, hotel receipts. Monroe had been methodical in her betrayal, planning every detail of my destruction. Now it was my turn to be methodical. First, we make sure everyone knows exactly who Monroe Calver really is. Her friends, her co-workers, her family. Then we do the same for Dr. Jory, and then we sit back and watch their perfect little plan fall apart. Mason grinned. Now you're talking my language. Carmen's yoga studio was Monroe's second home, a converted warehouse filled with expensive mats, pretentious mantras, and middle-aged women pretending that Downward Dog could solve their existential crises. Carmen herself was Monroe's best friend and biggest enabler, a 40-something former accountant who'd discovered spiritual enlightenment and designer yoga pants at roughly the same time. I arrived at 6 p.m., knowing Carmen would be closing up and Monroe would be at her weekly book club, which I now knew was code for meeting Jory at the motel. Finley? Carmen looked surprised to see me. Monroe's not here tonight. I know. I actually wanted to talk to you. I held up a manila envelope. About Monroe's spiritual journey. Carmen's smile faltered. Is everything okay? That depends on your definition of okay. I opened the envelope and pulled out one of Mason's photographs, Monroe and Jory in a passionate embrace outside the motel. Did Monroe mention that her path to enlightenment includes adultery? Carmen stared at the photo, her face cycling through confusion, shock, and something that looked almost like relief. Oh my God, Finley, I had no idea. Really? Because Monroe told me you've been covering for her, providing alibis for her yoga retreats and meditation workshops. She said you two were having problems, that she needed space to figure things out. Space to figure out how to leave me for her dentist, you mean? I showed her another photo. This is what Monroe's been doing during those spiritual retreats you've been helping her plan. Carmen sat down heavily on a yoga block, the photo trembling in her hands. I thought she was just trying to find herself. She found herself all right, in bed with a married man, spending my money to plan our divorce. I pulled out copies of the bank records. $15,000, Carmen. That's what Monroe's self-discovery cost me. Finley, I'm so sorry. I never would have helped her if I'd known. But you did help her. You lied for her, covered for her, enabled her to destroy our marriage. I took the photo back and put it in the envelope. The question is, what are you going to do now that you know the truth? Carmen looked up at me, tears in her eyes. What do you want me to do? I want you to stop lying for her, and I want Monroe's other friends to know exactly what kind of person they've been supporting. 20 minutes later, Carmen was on the phone with Leah, Monroe's coworker and social media coordinator. I listened from across the studio as Carmen described the photos, the evidence, the systematic deception Monroe had orchestrated. She used us, Carmen said into the phone, her voice growing stronger with each word. She made us accomplices in her affair, and she was planning to destroy Finley's reputation to cover her tracks. By the time I left the yoga studio, Carmen had called 6 of Monroe's closest friends. The word was spreading through Monroe's social circle like wildfire, and I hadn't had to say a single nasty word about my wife. I'd simply let the truth speak for itself. Monroe worked as a paralegal at Hartwell, Bishop & Associates, a mid-sized law firm that specialized in family law and personal injury cases. She'd been there for 8 years, building a reputation as a detail-oriented professional who could be trusted with sensitive information. That reputation was about to become a liability. I knew Monroe's boss, Patricia Hartwell, from various community events. She was a sharp, no-nonsense attorney who'd built her practice on discretion and ethical behavior. She was also a woman who'd been through her own messy divorce and had little patience for adultery. The package I sent to Patricia's office contained copies of everything: photos, bank records, hotel receipts, and transcripts of Monroe and Jory discussing their plan to manipulate their respective divorce proceedings. I included a cover letter explaining that Monroe had been using firm resources to facilitate her affair, including the office computer to book hotel rooms and the firm's phone to coordinate with Jory. I didn't have to wait long for results. Monroe came home that evening looking like she'd been hit by a truck. Her face was blotchy from crying, her professional composure completely shattered. Patricia fired me. she said without preamble. She said I was a liability to the firm's reputation. I looked up from my dinner, leftover Chinese food eaten alone at our kitchen table. That's unfortunate. What reason did she give? Don't play dumb, Finley. I know you sent her those photos. I sent her evidence of your professional misconduct. There's a difference. Monroe slammed her purse down on the counter. You're destroying my life. I'm revealing your life. You destroyed it all by yourself. I made a mistake, okay? People make mistakes. Mistakes are forgetting to pick up milk or missing an anniversary. Planning a 3-month affair while spending your husband's money to fund your escape isn't a mistake. It's a calculated betrayal. Monroe started crying again, but they were angry tears, not remorseful ones. You can't just ruin everything I've worked for because you're hurt. Watch me. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw something shift in her expression. The tears stopped, replaced by cold calculation. You think you're so smart, don't you? You think you can just destroy my life and walk away clean? I think I can make sure everyone knows exactly who you really are. We'll see about that. She grabbed her purse and headed for the door. This isn't over, Finley. No, I agreed. It's not. After she left, I called Mason. She's escalating, I told him. Whatever she's planning next, it won't be subtle. Good thing we're ready for her. Monroe's counterattack came 3 days later, and it was more vicious than I'd anticipated. I was at my architectural firm, reviewing blueprints for a new office complex, when my phone started buzzing with calls and text messages. The first few were from friends asking if I was okay. The next batch were from colleagues expressing concern. By the time I checked social media, Monroe's campaign was in full swing. She'd posted a long, emotional Facebook message describing her marriage to an emotionally abusive husband who'd isolated her from friends, controlled their finances, and driven her to seek comfort elsewhere. She painted herself as a victim of psychological manipulation, a woman who'd finally found the courage to leave but was now being stalked and harassed by her vindictive ex. The post had dozens of sympathetic comments from people who didn't know the full story, friends and acquaintances expressing support for her brave decision to leave an abusive marriage. Several people tagged local domestic violence resources and offered to help her find a safe place to stay. It was a masterful piece of manipulation, designed to reframe the narrative and make me the villain in our story. But Monroe had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated how thoroughly I'd documented her affair. I called Mason. She's playing the abuse card. Figured she might. Good thing we recorded that conversation where she and Jory discussed making false abuse allegations. Time to release the full dossier? Time to release the full dossier. Within an hour, Mason had created a comprehensive website documenting Monroe's affair with time-stamped photos, bank records, and audio recordings. The centerpiece was the recorded conversation where Monroe and Jory laughed about manipulating their divorce proceedings and discussed the best way to make me look like an abuser. I shared the link in a simple Facebook post. For those wondering about the truth behind recent allegations, please review the evidence at monroecalvertruth.com. All documentation is authentic and legally obtained. The response was swift and devastating. Monroe's friends began deleting their supportive comments and distancing themselves from her posts. Several people shared the website link with their own networks, spreading the truth faster than Monroe's lies had traveled. Carmen posted her own message, apologizing for initially supporting Monroe and explaining how she'd been manipulated into providing alibis for the affair. Leah from the law firm posted screenshots of Monroe using company resources to coordinate with Jory, confirming the professional misconduct allegations. By evening, Monroe's victim narrative had completely collapsed. The same people who'd offered her support that morning were now expressing disgust at her manipulation and false accusations. Monroe called me at 11 p.m., screaming so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear. You bastard! You've turned everyone against me. I just provided facts, Monroe. People drew their own conclusions. Those recordings were private. Those recordings documented your plan to commit perjury and make false accusations. I'd say that's pretty relevant to the public discussion you started. I'll sue you for invasion of privacy. With what lawyer? And what money? Patricia Hartwell isn't the only attorney in town who's seen the evidence, Monroe. Your reputation in the legal community is finished. The line went quiet for a moment. When Monroe spoke again, her voice was cold and controlled. You think you've won, don't you? I think I've told the truth. Whether that counts as winning depends on your perspective. This isn't over. You keep saying that, but your credibility is shot, your job is gone, and your friends know exactly what you did. What's left? She hung up without answering, but I knew Monroe well enough to recognize the tone in her voice. She wasn't giving up, she was regrouping. Monroe's final gambit was desperate, dangerous, and almost worked. She and Jory decided to stage a confrontation that would make me look violent and unstable. Their plan was simple: provoke me into an angry response, record it, and use the footage to support Monroe's abuse allegations and Jory's claims that I was stalking them. They chose the parking lot outside Jory's dental practice, figuring the public location would provide witnesses and make their staged encounter look more authentic. What they didn't count on was Mason's surveillance expertise and my sister Barb's talent for being in the right place at the right time. I got the call from Monroe at 2 p.m. on a Thursday. "Finley, we need to talk. Meet me at Jory's office in an hour." "Why would I want to meet you at your boyfriend's workplace?" "Because if you don't, I'm going to the police with evidence that you've been stalking and threatening us." I could hear the desperation in her voice, the edge of panic that told me this was her last play. "What evidence would that be?" "Text messages, voicemails, witness statements, enough to get a restraining order and criminal charges." "Interesting, since I haven't sent you any text messages or left any voicemails." "We'll see what the police believe." I looked across my office at Mason, who was listening to the conversation on speaker. He nodded and tapped his watch. He'd need 30 minutes to get into position. "Fine," I told Monroe. 1 hour, but this better be the last conversation we ever have." "Oh, it will be." Mason and Barb were in position when I arrived at Jory's dental practice. Mason had a clear view of the parking lot from across the street, while Barb was in the coffee shop next door with her phone ready to record. Monroe and Jory were waiting by his BMW, both of them looking nervous but determined. Monroe had her phone in her hand, obviously ready to start recording. "Thanks for coming," Monroe said as I approached. "We wanted to discuss the situation like adults." "What situation is that?" Jory stepped forward, trying to look intimidating. "The situation where you've been harassing Monroe and spreading lies about our relationship." "Your relationship? You mean your affair?" "Monroe is leaving you, Finley. It's time to accept that and move on." I looked at Jory, the soft, entitled man who thought he could steal another man's wife and face no consequences. "And you think I should just walk away quietly?" "I think you should stop acting like a psychopath," Jory said, raising his voice. "Monroe's scared of you, and frankly, so am I." I could see Monroe holding her phone, trying to angle it to capture my reaction. They wanted me angry, wanted me to lose control and give them the footage they needed. Instead, I started laughing. "You're scared of me?" I looked at Jory's soft hands, his expensive clothes, his perfectly styled hair. "You're scared of a 45-year-old architect?" "Don't underestimate him, Jory," Monroe said loudly, clearly performing for her phone's camera. "He has a violent temper. I've seen what he's capable of." "Really? When was that, Monroe? When I built you that garden shed you wanted? When I renovated our kitchen? When I spent 20 years working 60-hour weeks to give you the life you said you wanted?" Monroe's script was falling apart. She'd expected anger, not sarcasm. Jory tried to salvage the situation. "You need to stay away from us, Finley. We don't want any trouble." "Trouble?" I pulled out my own phone and opened the audio recording app. "Is that what you call destroying a 20-year marriage? Trouble?" Monroe was unhappy, Jory said defensively. "I gave her something you couldn't." "What was that? Mediocre dental work and a midlife crisis?" Jory's face flushed red. "You snake." "Careful, Jory. Monroe's recording this, remember. Wouldn't want to say something that makes you look bad." That's when they realized their plan had backfired. Monroe looked at her phone, then at Jory, panic spreading across her face. "You knew," she whispered. "I knew you'd try something desperate when everything else failed. I just didn't know it would be this stupid." I held up my phone, showing them the recording app that had been running the entire time. "Did you really think I'd walk into your little ambush unprepared?" From across the parking lot, Mason emerged from his surveillance position, camera in hand. Barb came out of the coffee shop, waving her phone. "Got it all," Barb called out cheerfully. "The whole pathetic performance." Monroe and Jory looked around frantically, realizing they'd been outmaneuvered completely. "This is harassment," Monroe shouted. "You can't just..." "Can't just what? Document your attempt to frame me for crimes I didn't commit? Record you making false statements? Prove that your abuse allegations are complete fabrications?" Jory grabbed Monroe's arm. "We're leaving." "Good idea," I said. "But Jory, next time you want to steal someone's wife, make sure she's worth the trouble. This one's been nothing but problems." As they drove away, Monroe screaming at Jory through the BMW's windows, Mason walked over and clapped me on the shoulder. "That was beautiful, Finn. They just handed us everything we needed to destroy their credibility permanently." "Almost," I said, watching their car disappear down the street. "But we're not done yet." The final confrontation happened at Murphy's Tavern. the dive bar where half the town went to drink away their problems and share their gossip. It was a Friday night, the place packed with familiar faces and loose tongues. I was nursing a beer and listening to the bartender, Tommy, recap the latest developments in what had become the town's favorite soap opera. So Monroe Calver tried to frame her husband for stalking? Tommy shook his head as he polished a glass. That's cold, even for someone cheating on their spouse. Heard she lost her job, too, said a voice from down the bar. Patricia Hartwell don't mess around when it comes to that kind of behavior. And the dentist? Asked another patron. What happened to him? His wife took him for everything, Tommy replied. Practice, house, kids. She's dating that ex-cop now. Mason something. I smiled into my beer. Erin Trentell had indeed moved fast once she learned about Jory's affair. With Mason's help, she documented Jory's financial infidelity and filed for divorce within a week. The dental practice was half hers, and she'd frozen all their accounts pending the settlement. That's when Monroe walked in. She looked terrible. Hollow-eyed, thin, wearing clothes that had seen better days. Her perfect hair was limp, her makeup smudged. The confident, manipulative woman I'd married was gone, replaced by someone who looked defeated and desperate. The bar went quiet as she spotted me. Every conversation stopped, every eye turned to watch what would happen next. Monroe walked over slowly, her heels clicking on the worn wooden floor. She sat down on the stool next to me without being invited. "Buy me a drink?" she asked quietly. I nodded to Tommy, who poured her a whiskey. She downed it in one gulp and asked for another. "So," she said after the second shot, "you won." "Did I? What exactly did I win?" "You destroyed my life, my job, my friends, my reputation. Even Jory won't return my calls now that his wife cleaned him out." I turned to look at her, this woman who'd shared my bed for 20 years and then called me extra weight. "I didn't destroy your life, Monroe, or I just stopped protecting you from the consequences of your choices." "Same thing?" "No, it's not. You destroyed your own life when you decided our marriage was worth less than your affair. I just made sure everyone knew the truth about what you did." Monroe laughed bitterly. "The truth. You want to know the truth, Finley? The truth is I stopped loving you years ago. The truth is I stayed married to you for the money and the security. The truth is Jory wasn't the first, just the one I got caught with." The words hit me like a physical blow, but I kept my expression neutral. Around us, the bar was silent, everyone straining to hear our conversation. "How many others?" I asked quietly. "Does it matter? 3, 4, maybe 5 over the years. You were so busy with your buildings and your blueprints, you never noticed when your wife was getting her needs met elsewhere." I felt something cold settle in my chest, a numbness that was almost peaceful. "And you think that hurts me? Doesn't it?" I considered her question seriously. A month ago, the revelation would have destroyed me, but now, after everything I'd learned about who Monroe really was, it felt like confirmation, rather than betrayal. "No," I said finally. "It explains things, but it doesn't hurt. You can't hurt someone who doesn't love you anymore." Monroe's face crumpled. "You loved me once." "I loved who I thought you were. But that person never existed, did she? She was just a character you played until you got tired of the role." "Finley?" "No." I stood up and pulled out my wallet, dropping a 20 on the bar. "We're done, Monroe. The divorce papers will be filed Monday morning. You'll get whatever the law requires and not a penny more." "Where am I supposed to go? I don't have a job. I don't have any money." "That's not my problem anymore. You made your choices, now live with them." I started to walk away, then turned back one last time. "Oh, and Monroe? When you're looking for your next husband to support you, you might want to be more careful about covering your tracks. Not everyone will be as patient as I was." I walked out of Murphy's Tavern and into the cool night air, leaving behind 20 years of marriage and the woman who'd made me question everything I thought I knew about love and loyalty. Behind me, I could hear Monroe crying and the low murmur of bar patrons discussing what they'd just witnessed. By tomorrow, the whole town would know how our story ended. And for the first time in months, I felt completely at peace. 6 months later, Monroe left town in the back of a Greyhound bus, heading for her sister's place in Ohio with nothing but a suitcase and whatever money she'd managed to scrape together from selling her jewelry. Jory had fled to Florida, where he was working as an associate in someone else's practice and living in a studio apartment. I kept the house, the savings, and my reputation. More importantly, I kept my self-respect and the knowledge that I'd handled the worst betrayal of my life with intelligence rather than violence, strategy rather than emotion. Mason and Erin got married the following spring. At their wedding reception, Mason raised a toast to second chances and the importance of choosing the right partner. I raised my glass and smiled, thinking about how sometimes the end of one story is just the beginning of another.